Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching how a refugee became a prince by Historically. Now this is the second part in Historically series on his favorite piece of Arabic history. Last time we were introduced to our protagonist, the last remaining Umayyad prince, Abdullah Rahman, who survived the Abbasid Revolution and is now fleeing westward. To where? Well, we haven't quite found out yet, but his whole family has been exterminated. He is the last remaining member, and we are following his journey as he tries to survive. Some pretty compelling stuff. If you guys end up enjoying this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
This video is sponsored by my... You know what? I'm sick of this sponsorship stuff. Why don't we sponsor ourselves? That's right, we updated our Patreon. If you like our work and want your doodly to be seen in a video, or maybe a cute artwork instead, consider supporting us so we can make videos even faster.
Nice.
Alright, let's do a quick recap. Year 750. Umayyad Caliphate, very big. Umayyads, not nice to non-Arab Muslims. Non-Arab Muslims come together as Abbasids and fight Umayyads. Umayyads get defeated, Abbasids take over the Caliphate, and the Umayyads family gets genocided. Many people die, and we are left with Prince Abdullah Rahman and his loyal freed slave men Berber. Oh, and they are sad because literally everyone who was with them died. All caught up? Very nice. Let's continue the show. Historically Facts, Part 7 and a half, and Chapter 3.
Yeah, it's less of a fun fellowship at this point, right? As they mentioned, basically almost the entire Umayyad family, the dynasty, has been wiped out by this Abbasid revolution, which, as they mentioned, was caused in large part due to the tension between Arab and non-Arab Muslims, especially non-Arab Muslim converts, but not exclusively converts. So Abdullah Rahman here, our last remaining Umayyad prince, is fleeing westward. He's got Berber here, his faithful companion, but they're really at a low point. They've lost everybody who began their journey with them, and now they're really just trying to survive, of course, but they're not content with just surviving. I mean, they want to establish themselves. I'm sure Abdullah Rahman wants to reclaim his position, reclaim his empire. He won't quite manage to do that, but though he's at a low point, there is still some ambition there.
The prince and Berber's goal was clear. Get to Al-Andalus to gather support and to rally up an army. But how will they get there? Basically, they had three choices. First, they could sneak through the Eastern Roman Empire and through Europe to get to Spain that way. But that would mean they had to face first of all the Romans, who held a burning hate to anything Arab, and then pass through the Christian European world, who were anything but friendly to the Muslims, because, you know, they are actively invading it from Spain. This route...
Yeah, and I'd say at this point the Eastern Romans perhaps had less of an issue with anything Arab and more anything Muslim, considering the Eastern Roman Empire had recently been greatly shrunken in size by the expansion of the Caliphate. Probably would have been pretty treacherous to sneak through, but, you know, they wouldn't have been the only Muslim travelers in the area. I mean, especially as the years continue, you will see some Muslim travelers, even inhabitants, especially of the borderlands between the Muslim world and the Eastern Roman Empire, but at this moment would have been pretty risky to travel through the Byzantine Empire and then through all of Europe to reach the Iberian Peninsula.
Being roughly 5,000 kilometers long would take around 300 days if we take into account the need to scavenge for food and avoiding detection.
Right. Also, that entire journey, mostly by land, that's going to take a long time. Now, to be fair, they may end up traveling by land westwards through North Africa as well. Be faster by boat, but there's additional dangers associated with that, so we'll see what method of transportation they end up selecting.
The second option was to cross through the sea.
Hmm.
Why bother risking getting caught by evil Romans and Abbasids if they can just hop on a boat? Well, for starters, they had to find a boat. And not just any, they needed one that is super sturdy and made for long-distance deep-sea voyaging. Good luck finding that at a time where basically everyone sticks to the coast and ships are generally not sturdy enough to get into open seas.
Yeah.
But maybe they find the
Yeah, you might look at the Mediterranean today in the modern era, and, seeing how we've traveled around the world, you might think, well, that's not really a great distance to travel, but that is not how people saw it at this time. Any type of traveling by sea was extremely dangerous, right? So when people traveled by sea, they tended to hug the coast, and typically to travel shorter distances. Now, of course, there were some travelers who traveled much longer distances by sea, some sailors who went, extremely far distances. That is true, but you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would want to take you across the entire Mediterranean, especially if you wanted to take sort of the quick way over and not just stick to the coast, hitting different ports along the way, which of course might have been dangerous for these two.
genie stuck in a lamp, and instead of wishing to teleport to Spain, they asked for a beautiful long-distance ship. Stupid. Next up, they would need a crew. And for a journey and ship like this, they would need around 10 to 20 people to operate it. Good luck funding them, not to mention finding those who won't stab Abdullah Rahman in the back because he's an Umayyad prince. Then they had to sail out. That's a problem. Then they needed to sail to ports to get food. That's a problem. And then there were pirates. That is a problem. But if they were to go for this route, it would take max 20 days, which is a lot faster than 300 days.
Yeah, so gives you some perspective there of how much faster travel by sea was compared to travel by land. Now, of course, going through Europe is a bit of an out-of-the-way route, but so much faster to go on a boat. However, we just saw all the risks associated with that kind of travel.
The final option was option C, walk along Africa. Though it's definitely the longest route with approximately 350 days of travel,
Dang.
it is the safest. Kinda. Depends if you are a sweet talker or not. Why? Well, before the Arabs conquered Northern Africa, it was home to the Berbers. Who are the Berbers? Well, factually, they are everyone who was here before the Arabs arrived. But to give you a better idea of who they are and what they look like, obviously because it's Africa, there were black people, but the majority of them were lighter-skinned European lookalikes, due to the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire having control of this region before the Arabs arrived.
European lookalikes is funny. Well, we still have many Berber tribesmen in North Africa today, and it's interesting to talk about skin color, right? Today, we have a very specific idea of race, where you've got, black people and white people and Asian people, and we've got all these different delineations, but in the ancient world, they viewed race a little differently in that they did not have the same conceptions of race we do today. Of course, they could see someone had a different skin color, and they had ideas of people from different countries or regions, but it wasn't so important, your skin color in particular, especially because if we're looking at the Mediterranean world, a lot of people tended to have a pretty similar skin color throughout the Mediterranean, sort of darker tan or olive skin. It more operates on a spectrum. And so, yeah, you have some people who are darker than others, and of course people can see that, but it was a little less important than it was, say, in the modern world. So they just had very different ideas of things like race at that time,
allowing plenty of white people to arrive and settle. Either way, the Berbers were all part of smaller communities or tribes, and because of that, they were pretty easy to defeat and conquer by the Umayyad invaders. But conquering something isn't often as easy as governing it.
Yes.
Cue in the unfair taxes. In part 1 of this two-part series, I also mentioned this unfair tax system towards non-Arab Muslims.
And this is the thing with a lot of these Berber tribes, is that, like they pointed out, yes, if you're a conquering army, you can probably run through the territory and take all the land, but what does controlling the land get you? These are people who do a lot of traveling, are pretty nomadic. Once you've conquered the land, do you actually have control over these people? Well, probably not. You would need a pretty stringent government bureaucracy to actually extract anything from these Berber tribes. And so essentially, for a long, long period of time, they're able to continue to live their traditional way of life, regardless of whatever state or empire was occupying the region. Not to say that didn't cause any changes over time. Of course it did, but they were perhaps more resistant to those changes than other communities in the region.
Two-part series, I also mentioned this unfair tax system towards non-Arab Muslims. You know, the one that caused the Abbasid Revolution and basically ignited the entire fall of the Umayyads? Well, some people kept commenting that actually it was fair. Oh, is it? Conveniently blurred name of the commenter. Let's talk about them. On the right side is a Muslim Arab. On the left side, a non-Muslim Berber. They are both farmers and both own their own piece of land, and after working hard all year, they each made a total of $100. Sweet. But before they can enjoy that money, they have to pay their taxes. Yeah, that's right. Even 1500 years ago, the evil system existed. The taxes for non-Muslims
Well, I mean, really, taxation has been the most important state function for all of history. I mean, the two things the state really has always done has been to collect taxes and some sort of defense or war making. These are the two essential functions of the state. Government states do a lot more things today, but taxation is really at the root of any sort of state or government apparatus. So that is going to be the one thing the state always does. In fact, in some ways, well, that along with the monopoly on legitimate force is sort of what makes a state, but there's a whole lot more you could say about that.
different from those who were affiliated with Islam. Let's start with the Muslim. First of all, they had to pay the zakat, which is a religious tax of 2.5% of all your wealth that then gets spent on improving the lives of less fortunate Muslims. Quote, Muslims, not Berbers. Then, if they made big money from farming, the Muslims also had to give up 10% of the farming profits, also known as usher, totaling to $12.50 a year. Moving over to the other side, we have the non-Muslim. Instead of paying zakat and usher, they had to pay the jizya and kharaj. The jizya was the tax Berbers had to pay for not having to go to the military. Well, why don't they just go to the military then to avoid paying this tax? Let's see the requirements. Male? Check. Masculine? Check. Muslim? The non-Muslims couldn't go to the army even if they wanted to, so they had to pay the tax whether they liked it or not, 10%. Secondly, there is the kharaj. If you own a land, there is a 20% tax for that, and sometimes it goes up to 50%. But for the benefit of the doubt, let's keep it at a low 20%. That's a final $30 on the left and $12.50 on the right.
Yeah, and look, what we see here is we see in Caliphate and in a lot of Muslim empires, if you were a non-Muslim, you were usually allowed to live and keep your religion and practice in whatever way you saw fit, as long as it was not disruptive to the state function, but you would, in this case, be paying more in taxes, or sometimes you'd have to offer up military service, depends on what you're looking at, and oftentimes military service came with conversion. I mean, you can look at the Ottoman Empire, for example. They had the devshirme system. They would go around and they would take children from non-Muslim communities, enslave them, convert them to Islam, and make them serve in the civil service or the military as janissaries, an elite military unit, right? Now, a lot of people seem to get sort of personally offended by this. Look, I'm not saying this was worse than other systems at the time. In fact, if you look at Christian kingdoms or Christian states, they tended to be less tolerant towards non-Christian subjects. I mean, we're sort of looking ahead a little bit, but you can look towards Reconquista in the Iberian Peninsula, where what they did with non-Christians is they either kicked them out or they killed them, right? So that's a lot less tolerant than forcing you to pay an extra tax or serve in the military or something like that, right? So you don't need to take it so personally. We're just talking about how the system worked at that time. You know, obviously I don't think this is good, but I'm not even necessarily making a moral judgment. were just saying that if you lived in one of these empires as a non-Muslim, you would be living as a second-class citizen, right? Which is not great, but there are worse things to be than a second-class citizen, namely dead, right? Which is what happened to a lot of non-Christians in Christian territories. And of course, it's sort of tough to generalize because it always is going to depend which state, which country you're looking at, whether Muslim or Christian or something else, right? So the generalizing doesn't always help, but we're sort of summing up the broad situation here.
Does it still sound fair? Even if the Berber converted to Islam, they often still had to pay the old taxes, including the new ones, even if they were told they didn't have to. So, Mr. Blurry Name.
Right, and we saw last time that a lot of, Muslim converts, especially non-Arab Muslim converts, but even some Arab Muslim converts, felt that they were not being treated equally to Arab Muslims or those who had already been Muslims prior to the expansion of the empire. And they felt they were still being treated as non-Muslims. They felt that was unfair, which is one of the big things that led to the Abbasid revolution.
How fair was it really, huh? If I asked this Berber, he would say it's definitely unfair. And it was so unfair, in fact, that before the Abbasids started their revolution, the Berbers were already at it. Usually these Berber tribes were very divided, which made them quite weak opponents. But now that they had a common enemy, the greedy Umayyads, they had a reason to combine and start a revolution. The revolt, starting in current-day Morocco, gained widespread popularity among the other Berber tribes and spread to the bottom of Al-Andalus all the way to modern-day Tunisia. The Umayyads obviously didn't like what happened and sent a massive army to teach those rebels a lesson. But somewhat ironically, they lost decisively against those who they didn't want to recruit into their army, resulting in the Umayyads massively losing their influence on most of the northern part of Africa.
Well, we talked about last time that sort of western North Africa here and the southern tip of Iberia were largely, at this point, in some sense, autonomous from the Umayyad. And so when the Abbasids take over, it's like, well, this region's already pretty autonomous. I'm not sure if they're going to follow the Abbasids any more than the Umayyads.
And even some key cities and fortresses in Spain. This was embarrassing for the Umayyads to say the least. But to tie this back in with Abd al-Rahman's story, and with option C, which is where this whole segment started with, because the Berber revolt happened semi-recently at the time Abd al-Rahman had to flee, Africa and Al-Andalus were in a struggle for power.
Right.
After the Berbers defeated the Umayyads, they all realized that now that there's no common enemy anymore, they have no reason to be united.
Classic.
I mean, it would be rational to use this new alliance to create the great Berber Empire that would stand for centuries. But who cares about long-term pleasure if you can result in short-term pleasure? AKA, kill each other. So Africa right now
This is classic. I mean, you have an uprising, a revolution, whatever. As soon as your common enemy is gone, what do the revolutionaries do? They turn on each other. Just classic, we see this many, many times.
Basically all about infighting, while the Abbasids tried to keep their control of it. And Al-Andalus was all about Umayyads being sad that they lost their homeland. With Christians taking revenge upon them in the north, Berbers being Berberians in the south, and the rebellious governor trying to take the peninsula for himself.
Right.
It would be a shame if someone with a righteous claim to power would show up and take it for himself. But yeah, getting to Al-Andalus through Africa wasn't going to be easy. But that wasn't specifically a bad thing, because it also meant that the Abbasids couldn't go there easily either.
Yes, you can see Abdullah Rahman is thinking, okay, maybe we'll go through Africa. Now, there's pros and cons, right? Now, he is an Umayyad, and they're not the most fond of Umayyads in that region, so that's a bit of a con. But the region is largely autonomous, so it means it's also outside of the control of the Abbasids, and they're not really friendly towards the Abbasid authority either, right? So you can understand why he felt, okay, still risky, still could be dangerous, but perhaps my best option in this situation.
Anyway, enough beating around the bush and state of the world updates. Yalla habibi, go take revenge and make a name out of yourself. The journey to Al-Andalus ended up taking way longer than just 350 days.
Oh, wow.
As a matter of fact, it took a whopping 5 years before Abd al-Rahman and Badr arrived at the peninsula. What he exactly did in all that time isn't too clear, but there was a notable event. Because let's talk about Abd al-Rahman. No, not our Abd al-Rahman, but this Abd al-Rahman. He was the governor of Ifriqiya, which is roughly modern-day Tunisia. And he wanted to establish his own rules, just like that governor did. People weren't really original at the time, okay? He tried to be Mr. Nice Guy to the Abbasids in an attempt to somehow convince them that they should definitely give him his own country for completely free, which they politely declined. So then, out of spite, he formally invited every person the Abbasids despised, including Abd al-Rahman, to stay in his region. So Abd al-Rahman, during his journey, went there to take a breather and to improve his relations with the Berbers.
Seems like maybe more than a breather. My man was going for 5 whole years. That's a long time to get, from the Middle East over to Spain, Iberia, Al-Andalus. But, traveling took a lot longer, and as we saw in our Ibn Battuta series, there's often a lot of side quests along the way.
What, you think he's just going to find an army laying around just like that? Nuh-uh, connections are everything. And luckily for our main protagonist, his mom just happened to be a Berber herself. Meaning Abd al-Rahman was partly a Berber too. The fact he was kinda one of them, that as an Umayyad he had a claim for the throne, that they both hated the Abbasids with a passion, that Abd al-Rahman was a charismatic talker, and the fact he promised prestigious positions in his new empire that he was going to conquer, meant that it kinda made sense to rally behind his cause. You know who wasn't behind Abd al-Rahman anymore? Abd al-Rahman, the governor. Hearing how more and more people started to rally behind the prince, plus the fact he was from a way more prestigious...
Yeah, my man must be thinking, uh-oh, perhaps I've made a mistake. I brought this guy in because he was an enemy of the Abbasids, common enemy, but this guy has a way more legitimate claim to authority than me. He is charismatic, he's bringing the people to his side. What you've done is just introduced a massive challenge to your own authority into your, the empire you're trying to build.
Family, than the governor himself was, made Abd al-Rahman worry that Abd al-Rahman was going to do something sinister. And this time, it doesn't matter which Abd al-Rahman you have in mind. They both thought that.
Right.
PTSD incoming, because that night, while the prince stayed in a camp of Berbers, the governor suddenly decided that he can't allow the prince to stay, and ordered his henchmen to get rid of him. This time, Badr wasn't around to save the prince, but the chieftain's wife was. According to sources, Abd al-Rahman and Badr only managed to hide from the governor's hunters because the chieftain's wife hid them under her, quote, personal belongings. See, it's moments like this where as a historian, you're allowed to make educated guesses to fill in the blanks.
Okay.
So we can decide that they hid under a conveniently placed Victorian-style dress. And it was pink, with ponies and glitter. Ah, the power of gaps in history. When the duo realized they were no longer welcome, they hastily packed their bags and continued their journey westwards.
Damn, this is the second time we've seen this sort of, assault take place against Abd al-Rahman. Of course, when you're on the run, a fugitive, these things can happen, but my man is really escaping narrowly with his life.
To Morocco.
Chapter 4, Revenge. Okay. Fellowship's expanded.
After 5 long years of travel, Abd al-Rahman had finally arrived in Morocco. He was welcomed with love and offered protection against the few Berber tribes who weren't that happy that he was here. The first thing Abd al-Rahman did was to say goodbye to Badr, though not for too long. Though the two have been together since the start of their journey, it was time to split ways. Abd al-Rahman ordered Badr to cross the ocean and to start looking for support in Al-Andalus, while the prince himself would stay in Morocco to look for support there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was sort of joking about how long it took him to cross Africa to get to the other side, but of course, it's not like he was just traveling in those 5 years. I mean, we talked about some of the other things he was doing, but importantly, he's been building support this entire time. It doesn't matter if you're able to reach Al-Andalus if you've got no backing, no support behind you. You need to build a movement with you as you go.
And with determination in their hearts, and probably a slight tear in their eyes, the iconic duo split their ways to assure their future.
It's not right. It's not right. Frodo and Sam, they gotta stick together.
I guess now would be a good time to introduce the governor. Meet Yusuf Abd al-Rahman, yes, seriously again.
There's a lot of Abd al-Rahmans here.
Al-Firi. However, we will just call him Yusuf al-Firi. He was from the same family that the governor Abd al-Rahman was. and he was well aware of the upcoming arrival of the Umayyad prince. Now, as opposed to his idiotic cousin, Yusuf had already planned what to do with Abd al-Rahman. He knew his peninsula was a mess and that the people urged the leader who would bring order to the existing chaos. The chaos that most Andalusians attributed to the governor himself. Letting the popular and more prestigious Abd al-Rahman freely walk around the peninsula would mean certain defeat for the governor. So he had two options. See how we are bringing this back again? Very clever, I know. Option A. Attack. Gather the army and crush Abd al-Rahman before he can get too much support. After that, quietly pull the rug over the whole refugee prince story and blame the Abbasids for killing Abd al-Rahman somewhere during his escape. It's a flawless plan. If it weren't for the Christians rebelling Berbers and the northern Andalusians rebelling right as the prince is about to arrive.
Yeah, not to mention killing this Umayyad prince. You know, yes, it may prevent him taking over your position, but you're not really winning yourself any favors. Even if you manage to cover it up, you don't really gain much from that. You just prevent the situation from potentially getting worse. Now, I imagine the other option is going to be to co-opt our Umayyad prince.
That leaves us with plan B. Woman.
Huh?
What is the number one thing that men like to do? Marrying someone's daughter.
I see.
Brilliant idea, Yusuf. Tell the prince that if he stops claiming the throne to get revenge on the Abbasids, that he would get to marry a daughter. Let's see how that goes.
So, essentially try to co-opt him. That, is difficult because doing that, you're still keeping him as a massive threat to your own authority. I suppose through that option, you're hoping that you can gain something from his allegiance, but there's definitely a risk there. I guess we'll see what happens.
My prince, the remaining Umayyad people are here to join your cause. And so are the Berbers and other local powers who dislike the governor. As a matter of fact, the southern regions peacefully and completely surrendered themselves to you and call you the rightful emir of the peninsula.
Nice.
After politely declining the woman,
Nice
there
meme.
was only one final way for Yusuf to stop Abd al-Rahman from dethroning him. Go for option A anyway.
Yeah.
As Abd al-Rahman's influence grew in
Yeah,
the
now he's a real and immediate threat. You've tried to co-opt him, hasn't worked. Now the threat's right in front of you, you gotta do something about it.
region, Yusuf had no time to waste and marched straight to the prince's army that was well on its way to the provincial capital of Al-Andalus, Cordoba. Abd al-Rahman, also known as the rebel leader among the ranks of the Alfiris, had an army around the size of 3,000 men, consisting of Berbers, Umayyads and local Andalusians. This was nothing compared to the governor, who came walking in with over 10,000 well-equipped soldiers. As the citizens of Cordoba mounted their walls to witness the two armies in a standoff, it was looking to be a one-sided slaughter of the smaller rebel army.
I mean, he's pretty badly outnumbered. I have seen worse, but it's pretty bad. Abdullah Rahman is in a difficult position.
Where the Umayyad dream would die off once and for all. However, as the sunset lowered and lowered, both armies realized how tired they were after their exhausting journey. So in classic ancient warfare tactics, both armies set up camp somewhat close to each other to catch some sleep and to delay the fight for when it wasn't pitch black outside. But this time, it's not Abd al-Rahman getting jumped while trying to sleep.
Damn, he took the trick that was used against him multiple times and turned it against his enemy. I guess he was learning from his opponents as he survived.
This time, the jumper is Abd al-Rahman himself.
Sneaky.
In the dead of night, Abd al-Rahman and his forces attacked the poorly defended camp. Chaos followed as the half-asleep Furies didn't even have time to get into armor before Abd al-Rahman stood in the entrance of their tent.
Wow.
A tsunami of fire spread through the camps as the Alfiris desperately tried to regroup and defend themselves. Abd al-Rahman and Berber, knowing exactly how it is to be on the receiving end of a midnight raid, skillfully targeted the supply and command posts of the Alfiri setup, destroying everything and all the battle plans the governor had prepared. Then, before the Alfiris could properly defend themselves, Abd al-Rahman and his forces retreated to their own camp and slept out the night. The following day, after assessing the damage done by the Umayyad prince, the governor was fueled with rage and decided he has been toyed with long enough. He set off his army to take revenge for last night. But there, he found not only the well-rested army of Abd al-Rahman ready to settle the deal, but also his own generals and soldiers standing in front of him.
Damn.
And there, it hit the governor. The tents and sleeping Al-Feri soldiers were merely a secondary target that night. The real target was the army's morale. And it was absolutely shattered. Before Yusuf Al-Feri could comprehend the state his army was in, it was already too late.
Very smart. So we see that our protagonist, our Umayyad prince, not only is he charismatic and a survivor, but he's an intelligent military leader, and I'm sure he learned some of that through surviving for these, years since the Abbasid Revolution. Yusuf here is no match.
Abd al-Rahman, leading the army himself, rushed into the sleep-deprived soldiers and trampled each and everyone in their path. It was an outcome the people of Cordoba never expected, but oh so wished for. The Umayyad prince image was set, and the people of the capital welcomed him with open arms. The governor, or well, ex-governor, ended up getting captured that morning. But instead of being beheaded, which, like you know, was customary at the time, Abd al-Rahman offered Yusuf peace in an attempt to show the rest of Al-Andalus how merciful the prince was, even against his political opponents.
Wow.
But the governor overplayed his hand. He declined the offer and escaped to the north, where he immediately started to rally up an army to take back his throne. But before he could mobilize and take revenge, the supporters of Abd al-Rahman already caught up with him.
Yeah, sorry, man. You are not the big dog in Iberia anymore. Okay? Someone a lot more impressive has entered. You have the last remaining heir to the Umayyad dynasty. He's got a lot more claim to authority than you do.
And delivered his hat to the prince who was still in Cordoba.
Yeah.
As he looked the deceased governor in his dead eyes, Abd al-Rahman knew now was the time. And in the year 756, 6 years after his caliphate was taken from him, he revived it and established the Umayyad dynasty, also known as the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba.
Yep.
Finally, he could take revenge on the Abbasids and slowly but painfully take back all that was taken from him.
Well,
or so he wished.
yeah.
Turns out, being a ruler of a massive country, especially a newly established one, takes a lot of effort and time. And before Abd al-Rahman knew, it was time for him to pass away.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in the previous episode, but the story of Abd al-Rahman is not someone who manages to reconquer his empire. He doesn't quite do that. But what he does manage to do is survive, set himself up elsewhere, and establish a pretty impressive state of his own, right? Now, no, he doesn't reconquer the entire caliphate. I'm sure that would have been nice for him, but it's an impressive achievement nonetheless.
He never got to take revenge on the Abbasids, though he did repel many of their attacks in the following years. His emirate became a safe haven for political opponents of the Abbasids, and Cordoba specifically became one of the most prosperous cities during the medieval times.
Yeah.
But as years turned into centuries, the Umayyad pride and the story of our heroic refugee prince slowly and surely turned forgotten. And the country in the 11th century split off into many smaller factions, which opened a huge opportunity for the Holy Templars to take back the peninsula. Decisive blow after blow pushed the Muslims out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, Islamic history has been not forgotten, but sometimes swept under the rug, especially following Reconquista, the Christian reconquering of the Iberian Peninsula. There's been a lot less of a focus on that period of time when it was ruled as an emirate.
Out of the peninsula. And officially in the 15th century, the Reconquista came to an end. And all that remains of Abd al-Rahman is a statue in a coastal city. The city where he entered the peninsula. Though it isn't clear what happened to Badr, we like to think they stayed together after all that happened, living a long life with his prince, ruler, and most importantly, his friend. By the way, this guy that tried to kill Abd al-Rahman is actually a Patreon supporter. If you want to get your own doodly in a video as well, check out the Patreon, and thanks for watching.
Alrighty. Well, there we go. That was definitely an interesting video. You can see that the sun is coming in as the late afternoon hits in my room here. That was a good one. I enjoyed this short little two-part series. I was I mean, not really that familiar with the story. Of course, familiar with the fact that the Iberian Peninsula, Al-Andalus, breaks off from the rest of the Caliphate, but I can't say I knew too much about our protagonist of the series. This was definitely an entertaining one. I certainly enjoyed it. If you guys did, you could leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Thank you so much, everybody, for following along. I hope you're all having a great day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.